Everybody, how are you all doing today? All right, thank you for responding. That's so nice. So my name is Ian B, and I'll be moderating this session of our legislative forum. So how this event's going to work is, first I'll introduce our legislators, give them a few minutes to have some opening comments on what they've been doing the past month and the past week during funnel week over at the state capitol. Then we'll open it up for Q&A. And then if we do have time, I always like to give a couple minutes for each of our legislators to have closing comments again, if there is time. So just a reminder on this year's forum format, we want to be able to explore specific topics in greater detail. And so each forum this year is going to have a specific set of topics we'll be covering. So this month, we have a number of different bills that we want to discuss, one of which is biofuels, House Bill 2128, the flat income tax, which is House File 2317, Senate tax reform proposal, including funding increase for DNR and conservation land acquisition, which is Senate File 2206, taking fur-bearing animals outside of open season, which is House File 2369, renewable energy, which is Senate File 2127, cybersecurity, House File 2288 and Senate Study Bill 3068, religious freedom, which is House Study Bill 593 and 667. The governor's education proposal, also known as school choice, which is Senate Study Bill 3080 and 672. And then lastly, school supplemental aid, which is Senate File 2204 and House File 2316. And so to be respectful of our legislators' time, we do want to remind everybody that we will be ending the event at 9 a.m. today. Again, not a full day event, although I'm sure you'd love it. And then last but certainly not least, we would like to welcome and thank our sponsors for this event, which are the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center, Freeman Cavanides Law Firm, Jefferson County Farm Bureau, and Marissi Law Offices. So thank you to our sponsors for the morning's refreshments and helping to make this event free and open to the public. Alrighty, and so with that, I will introduce our legislators for you today. We have Representative Jeff Shipley of House District 82. We have Representative Joe Mitchell from House District 84, and Senator Adrian Dickey from Senate District 41. All right, so legislators, I will invite you guys to have some opening remarks of just what have you been doing the past month since we last spoke, or really the past couple of weeks since we last spoke. Yeah, Jeff, if you want to start.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ian, and thank you to all our generous sponsors, and most importantly, thanks to each and every one of you for making time this morning to be involved in this event and important discussion.
And appreciate everyone making sure our audio and technical equipment's up running successfully. Appreciate everyone's help making this possible. A lot of things have happened. I think we're just finished the sixth week of the legislature. It's kind of interesting how the first few weeks it feels pretty slow, then all of a sudden you're kind of hit with a waterfall. So a lot of things have been happening. A lot of big, consequential policy debates, discussions. The first thing, again, I just want to appreciate and express that gratitude. I know last week I talked about the importance of prayer and praying for the situation in Canada. In the last 3 weeks, that's taken kind of a turn for the worse. It's not been resolved yet, and the reason why this is important and affects us in Iowa is when you have governments restricting the free flow of people and goods, especially for arbitrary or capricious policy reasons, it can cause a lot of significant economic damage, and it can cause a lot of bad things to happen. So I just want everyone to be very mindful that international situations do affect us in Iowa, affects our supply chain, it affects the cost of the prices we pay for goods and services, and could be very ominous what we're seeing. So I'm just very, very thankful that we can gather here today, have this discussion, and frankly enjoy the freedom that a lot of people in the world just don't quite have or don't quite enjoy. So I think that's very first to get that off the top.
Was that all it was? Okay. All right.
Magic button.
Well, hopefully nobody had any problem hearing me. But anyway, so just getting that all out of the way, we've talked about a lot of things the last few weeks. I've been very fortunate to serve in this position and be a part of these discussions, whether we're talking about school funding and all the issues affecting schools. I was able to present an amendment on the House floor last Thursday. Earlier this Wednesday, I was actually able to give the prayer for the Iowa House, and later that night we passed a historic tax credit bill and a very robust medical privacy, medical freedom bill moved out of state government committee. So I like to connect those two and show how every little bit matters in that building. But the other big thing that that we were able to work on is I did introduce the Second Amendment Preservation Act with 18 co-sponsors. Thank you to all the co-sponsors, especially Representative Joe Mitchell, who signed on to that. Basically, it just clarifies the existing relationship between the state and the federal government, and basically, again, just restates how the existing law says that the federal government could not commandeer Iowa resources to enforce federal actions. And what we're talking about now is unconstitutional federal executive orders that would basically turn Iowans into criminals overnight, which is what we're seeing the ATF do. Will again take an arbitrary or capricious action, outlaw a common firearm accessory, and then all of a sudden, what, Iowans are going to be felons overnight? So anyway, that's a very important bill. I was very happy that it got the support it did, and again, is just really clarifying some of these fundamental constitutional questions, the relationship between state and federal power, and of course, us as individuals in relationship to our government. So some very, very big, important discussions, and again, just so thankful that we're able to have all that together as a community. So thank you again, Ian, and all the sponsors, and for you guys to come in. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Joe, what are your comments?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ian, and thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. I know we all do appreciate the diverse conversations that we get to have here with you all and answering your questions and talking to you as your representatives, in Southeast Iowa. And so, as Jeff talked about, there was a lot of stuff that happened this last week, particularly, in the legislature, because it was funnel week, and so that meant that bills that had been proposed needed to get through a standing committee to stay alive in the legislative process. And so we were also able to pass that historic tax cut on the floor this week. And so for a recap, what that did is essentially made one bracket for everyone in the state. So instead of having three brackets now, we're going to have one bracket where everyone pays 4% flat tax across the board for income, and then also got rid of income taxes altogether for retirees, folks that have a pension or 401k, use cash rent for the retirement income. And so that was a very important bill, and I know the Senate is working on their own version, but I'm very optimistic that we're going to have a very good consensus of a bill at the end of the year. And so that was a very important first step to be able to give more money back to Iowans. And one of the things I continually got asked about this week when we did pass that is why are we giving tax cuts out instead of giving more money to different programs around the state? And the answer to that is simple, is that we have a surplus. We have $1 billion surplus that we've overtaxed Iowans, and so you deserve to have that money back. It's not for us to go on a spending spree. And so that's why it was so important that we did the tax cut now and made sure that we're giving back to Iowans as they're affected by inflation and the economic circumstances that are unfortunately happening right now in our country. The other thing I thought was important that happened this week is the governor signed into law the SSA funding that we were able to pass. And so we are giving $180 million new dollars to K-12 public education, which I think is important because we have a lot of public schools down here in Southeast Iowa. And I think as someone that's part of the majority, we need to govern and we need to make sure that we're managing our budget. And we were able to do that when the governor signed into that bill into law and gave $3.6 billion to education for this upcoming fiscal year. But besides that, I serve on several different committees, and we passed a lot of bills, including the Medical Freedom Act through the State Government Committee, which I was proud to vote for. And so I think there was a lot of good things that were passed through this week, but looking forward to answering your questions as they come up.
All right. And Senator Dickey.
Yes, again, like Jeff and Joe said, thank you for being here this morning. It's got somebody pointing at me, they can't hear me, so hopefully that's better. It's been a long week. They briefly mentioned what Funnel Week's about, and I'll expand on that a little bit more. Essentially, any legislator can draft a bill. They can draft 1 bill, 0 bills, 100 bills if they want, and then in the first 6 weeks of session. There's a little bit of a process that those bills that have value kind of find a way into a committee and then signed to a subcommittee. for those bills to remain live throughout the session, they have to pass out of subcommittee, then they have to pass out of their committee to remain alive. And often what happens, you get down to funnel week, this is a week that those bills have to move out of those committees, with the exception of Ways and Means and Appropriations, because they're tax and spend bills, those are always alive. But every other bill has to pass out of that subcommittee and committee to remain live for the rest of the session. And what that does is it just keeps, the bills that are of high value and people see of great importance alive for the remainder of the session. And what often happens during funnel week is lobbyists that may have been a little bit asleep behind the wheel on bills that they're interested in start bugging you to see if you can get their bill out of committee. And same way as some legislators that wrote a particular bill. All of a sudden they realize it's the last week and their bill hasn't moved through committee yet, and they try to get that done. So I'm the chairman of the Senate Business and Labor Relations Committee, and so you have a little bit added, or not a little bit, a lot of added stress and pressure with people coming at you, wanting their legislation passed. And as a chairman, it's an opportunity where you also, if you don't find value in that piece of legislation, you sit on it. So it's a good week to get behind us. You'll see a lot more actual floor debate moving forward now, where we got key pieces of legislation that we're looking at, and we can start debating on the floor and addressing those needs and concerns.
All right, thank you all so much. So next we'll turn to our Q&A session, and we do have a microphone set up kind of on the right side of the general section here. And so we do want to encourage a variety of questions, and also want to be sure that we have time to answer as many questions as possible. And so if you do have a question, we invite you to come up. And I'll ask that if somebody does have a similar question than you, please pivot to a different question that's in your mind, and have that question ready when your turn is up. And then secondly, I do want to encourage a lively public discourse here, but also want to send a reminder to our audience to please be respectful to our legislators and to everyone else in the audience today. So after you ask your question, please refrain from interrupting our legislators as they respond, so that we can hear their thoughts and opinions in full. And then also, in an effort to answer as many questions as possible, I do want to focus and stick to maybe a response of approximately 2.5 minutes per legislator for each question. And then last but not least, I do want to send a quick reminder that today's topics are biofuels, flat income tax, the Senate tax reform proposal, taking fur-bearing animals outside of open season, renewable energy, cybersecurity, religious freedom, the governor's education proposal, which is also called school choice, and school supplemental aid. And so if anybody in the audience does have a question, I invite you to line up behind the microphone now. And then if we do have any sponsors in our audience, I encourage you to do so as well. You'll kind of get first dibs, so to speak. All righty, we got our first taker. And if you could start by saying your name and kind of where you live, just so these folks know, kind of where you're from and who you are.
Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning. I'm Joe Ledger. I'm here. I live northwest of Fairfield, and I've been following you guys on different things, and the biofuels is kind of on my mind this morning about we raise corn here in Iowa, so why not use some of that ethanol instead of having oil shipped in from other places? I just want your guys' thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you getting us kicked off this morning. So I know we did recently, the Iowa House passed the biofuels dispenser requirement, Biofuels Bill. I did support that. I know I had heard from you and your folks for a number of years about how important it is. Honestly, I had a little bit of difficulty parsing through a lot of the, frankly, energy kind of questions. I don't have a natural chemistry degree to understand the difference between carbon fuels and ethanol fuels. How I arrived at supporting this bill was basically just the importance of long-term relationships. And what I was most impressed by was, well, frankly, I'll just put it this way. There's a gentleman named Brent who's involved in the corn growers down in Davis County. And he took a lot of really great leadership on that school board when this OSHA mandate was coming through. And, because he trusted me so much to help them through that, and we're able to work together and collaborate. You know, to me, it's just as easy as trusting him and taking his word for it, and that's how I ended up supporting the bill. So sorry if that's not the most strongest endorsement of ethanol. You know, I think it's fine. So I guess I'm relatively neutral on the whole thing.
But we did pass that bill for you. And again, just going back to that conversation, I think because we visited in December, and the bill came a long way. And I had, just heard some complaints, and I think we were trying to address those. And so that's basically my firsthand experience of the legislative process on that one. It was a pretty big project, and I guess we'll see what happens next. But that's my perspective on it. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking for, but anyway, thank you again.
Yeah, of course. And I also voted for the Biofuels Bill as well. Can we hear me now? Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I also voted for the Biofuels Bill as well, and was proud to support that. I think any way that we can encourage and incentivize folks to use ethanol, I think, is a good thing for the state of Iowa, and as we go into the future, because we're going to continue to see a battle between electric vehicles and gas-powered vehicles, and I think the more that we can incentivize our gas-powered vehicles to use ethanol is a good thing for our farmers, and it is a good thing for our state. But I think the biggest concerns in the beginning, when we started this conversation last year, were the mandates we're going to be putting on small businesses and small gas stations to put certain equipment in. And from my opinion, I think that our convenience stores and the corn growers and the other folks involved in the bill came together with a good compromise, and so I was proud to support it and the end product it had.
The bill that we're talking about right now made it through the House. They've debated it. It has not been talked about in the Senate yet. I love our farmers. I'm going to support our farmers. This bill's not the bill to do that, in my opinion. Not yet. It's got some work that needs done to it. As the bill currently stands, you will see a very large percentage of small convenience stores go out of business because of the requirements that are in with this bill. The bill, I'd say, was very craftily worded, and how it appears that there's funding and exemptions put in place to help the small mom and pop stores through the process. But when you have a little insight on the industry and read the crafting wording of some of this, you'll find that there's some real problems with how the bill is structured. A couple things. First off, the time frame. 2026 is the time frame when these things have to be implemented. That's 4 years out. We're talking about roughly 800 stores that are going to have to go through this process of upgrading dispensers, piping, or tanks. There's 3 pretty major players in the state of Iowa that install these systems, and 3 more outside of the state, surrounding state, that do these installs. And when you think about our seasons, those installs can only take place 7 to 8 months a year. Between those 5 or 6 installers, they can do about 50 systems, 50 stores a year. If you got 800 stores and all these installers can do a total of about 50 or 60 a year, you're looking at a 16-year window, not a 4-year window to get it done. I know for the one location that I have, I just reached out to try to get the equipment and was told to be at least 2 years before I could get equipment because of all the issues we have on trying to buy anything in this country right now. Throw out a mandate where you got 800 stores just in Iowa alone that's trying to buy the equipment. You can see where the time frame doesn't add up. There's a 15-cent credit, basically a 9 and a 6-cent credit goes in play for selling E15. Hy-Vee, Come and Go, Quick Star, our major chain stores have probably 90 to 95% of their stores currently available to sell E15, and that's great. They've been building new stores over the years. In the last 10 years, probably most every store built has the equipment to put E15 in their pumps. The requirement, though, that says every store moving forward and with this bill is you got to put equipment in for E85. That's about another $50,000 upcharge over what we're being asked to sold, which is E15. But when you look at all the big 3, big 4 that have the equipment in right now, there's a 15-cent tax credit that goes in place for them selling this product. Well, I can say over the years, when you sell ethanol, E10, which is 84% of our sales, that savings goes to the consumer. As a gas station owner, believe it or not, we don't make money on gas. If it is, it's very, very, very little. The money's made inside the store, selling the pop, selling the pizza, that's where the money's made. It's not necessarily or very rarely ever made at the pump. The problem with this 15-cent credit is if you have your big chain stores and they already have the product in place, and they're going to be able to sell for at least 4 years, at least 2 years, to 4 years, to 6 years, until the other mom and pops can get it put in place, the big stores are going to be selling at a 15-cent per gallon price advantage. Well, if they're selling gas 15 cents a gallon cheaper than the guy across the street, I don't think you have to take very long to figure out that the guy across the street is probably not going to be in business very long. That's one reason why the big chains are supporting this bill the way it is right now. It's going to be very hard for a small retailer to get, even if they want to do the upgrades, to do it before they're out of business because of the price disadvantage. So that credit, in my opinion, needs to be sunsetted back several years so that disadvantage isn't in place from day one. The timeline also has to be taken a look at because they're just physically not able to do that many stores in the timeline that's required in this bill. Another issue with it is it's the EPA and the federal government. They do not allow the E15 sale in the summer months. They're very, very quiet on how they're going to address the issue. And the DC Circuit Court ruled that they will not address the issue whether retailers may legally offer E15 with an RVP exceeding 9 PSI. They haven't backed off on that. So this bill, unless the EPA caves, would force basically every gallon of E15 that's sold in the summer months to come from another source. And the closest that I've been able to identify right now is from Chicago because their E15's at a different blend level than, to meet the emissions requirements that Chicago has, which is different than Iowa. So that's going to add a significant amount of cost to it. EPA has also issued a statement saying that E15 and summer RVP cannot be circumvented by putting new labeling on dispensers. That's one rumor that's gone around with this bill is you just put different stickers on your label, on your dispensers, and that's okay. The EPA has said that's not correct. There's a lot of misinformation going around the bill, and that makes it very difficult when you want to do what's right. I would never pass a piece of legislation that would potentially put 25% of the farmers out of business, and that's kind of what this is doing. We hear there's a lot of talk about the exemptions that are put in place. There's two main exemptions that are put in place. One, if the cost of your store costs over $71,000 to do the upgrade, then you're exempt from it. Yeah, that's true. But they don't tell you the rest of the story, and the rest of the story says that if you ever want to sell your store then, that the entire store, every component of it has to be upgraded to E85. Well, that very well could be at a cost in excess of $500,000. So if your store, in little Bonaparte, Iowa, or little Packwood, Iowa, or Richland, Iowa, whatever it is, the store may be worth $400,000, but if you got to put $600,000 into it to sell it, you can kind of figure out you're not going to be able to sell your store. So that exemption really has very little interest. What I'm getting at is there's an exemption, and they sell that there's an exemption to take care of that situation, but it doesn't take care of the situation because it makes the problem worse in a couple years down the road. The other exemption at play is the one that says if you can do an upgrade, if you can provide a product to one pump for less than $71,000, then the state will kick in $50,000 to do it. Okay, so it only costs you $21,000 to do it. Again, the bill's been skillfully crafted in the wording of it. Next time you go to a station, look at the station you go to. Most of the time they'll have 4 or 6 dispensers. Never once has there been a station that sells only one product at one dispenser, because how it works is for $71,000 and less, the only way you cannot add a tank in the ground at that price. Okay, for $71,000 and less to meet that formula, you're basically upgrading just one dispenser, one product where the hoses are, okay? To do that, that means you're having to get rid of, more than likely, your E10. okay, which is right now 84% of the sales in Iowa is E10. E15 right now makes up 4% of our sales. So we're going to get rid of the highest moving product we have and replace it with the lowest moving product that's out there. Okay, so you're going to do that, but the bill says you only have to provide the product at one pump. Okay, they're basically also saying you don't have to get rid of E10, but the funding structure doesn't allow for you to put another tank in. So you have to get rid of E10 to put E15 in. How a pump set up, how gas stations are configured is you have a tank, and there's a pipe that goes from that tank to the first dispenser, and then to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next. So this bill says, well, you can unhook that pipe going to those other dispensers. Well, you've created several problems in doing that. One is that the rest of your dispensers won't sell E15. Okay, well, that's your cheapest product. With all the tax incentives, that's going to be your cheapest product. Well, a store owner can't have basically just one pump where 80% of his gallons are going to go through. So it's going to force him to upgrade all the dispensers. That price, though, at $20,000 to $40,000 for every dispenser, doesn't figure into the factor of what the $71,000 that the state's going to pay for. So you can very easily have another $200,000 in just dispensers to be able to sell a product. But again, that money doesn't factor in to this formula. It's not, you know, when you read the bill, it sounds really good that they've really made accommodations to support all these small convenience stores, but they haven't. And that's the problem I have with this. I would love to vote for this thing. When it comes in the Senate, and I don't know when we're going to be talking about it, but when it's in the Senate, I would expect some amendments that will put in place to address some of these issues, and then they'll have to probably move back over to the House. But it's something I fully want to support. I mean, but the analogy is, you know, for gas stations that have to do these upgrades, right, to sell a product, it's a product they will make no more money on than what they're making right now on the E10 or Clear 87. They just don't, because the tax credits get moved on to the consumer. But they're having to put all this infrastructure in to sell it. It'd be kind of like telling a farmer, you've got to go buy all brand new John Deere equipment this year. You've got to buy all brand new equipment this year, even though it may not make a bit of difference on the crop you grow, but you got to do it because it's good for Iowa, because John Deere tractors are made in Iowa, so it's good for Iowa. Where from your standpoint, you're like, I'm not going to make any more money using brand new John Deere tractors and equipment to put my crop in. The analogy is somewhat the same way. Where I struggle as much of anything with this is from being in the gas industry is, again, the gas industry doesn't profit from this product. And we'll sell anything. I mean, we will. I mean, how many times you chuckled, you went to a convenience store and saw a pet rock on the counter for $5? You know, I mean, I used to joke 30 years ago, you know, heck, we'll sell water. You know, if somebody wants to buy water, we'll sell water. We don't, you know, and now you look at it and 3 doors and the coolers are all nothing but water. You know, I mean, the point is that industry will sell whatever the consumer wants. The consumer's not asking for this product. And it's just very difficult to find a way to pay for the infrastructure for a product that's not really in demand and you're not going to make any more money on. The people that make money, are going to make money on this is, you know, renewable fuels, and it's the ethanol producers. And if you took last year in the state of Iowa, there's 4.1 billion gallons of E100 produced. You know, for the corn that goes into the, you know, the ethanol plants, they produce 4.1 billion gallons of pure E100, okay? And then that gets added into gasoline to make up your various blends. And the average price of E100 last year was $2.55 a gallon. If you tax that 1 cent a gallon, not 1%, but just 1 cent, last year you had $41 million. If you could do this thing, let's say in 10 years, I mean, let's say you could get all the 800 stations upgraded in 10 years. If you did $41 million, 1 cent for the people that are actually making the profit and producing it, the ethanol people, in 10 years, you have enough money for all 800 stores to do a $500,000 upgrade, replace every tank, every dispenser, all the concrete, everything to E85 levels. you could do it for 1 cent. But that industry is not paying anything in on this deal, but yet they're the one that profits entirely from it. That's a component that's never been talked about. Now, I know I'm not going to be very popular in saying this. I want to vote for this bill because I want to support our farmers. I just don't want to do it at the sake of making hundreds of convenience stores go out of business. So I think, to be honest, I think this is a bill that will get passed this year. I think when it comes over to the Senate, we'll be able to address some of these issues on the funding and the timelines. I think we'll make some changes and get a bill passed that will go back to the House and the governor will sign. So, and I want that to happen. I'm sure I come across as being very negative. I want that to happen. I don't think the bill that's been passed out of the House right now is the bill that will probably allow that to happen. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Senator Dickey, your points are well taken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for your question. Do we have another question from the audience? What's your name?
Hi there. Get this mask down. I'm Tom O'Donnell. I live near Keosauqua. Excuse me. I appreciate Senator Dickey having a very nuanced view of this ethanol issue. It's more complicated than it looks. I'm not going to address my question to that, but it does occur to me that we're kind of picking winners and losers by compelling stations to sell a product that there's currently no great demand for. My question is regarding the flat tax and the essentially revenue reduction bill that you're putting through. Explain for me again why this is necessary, why we want to have a flat tax.
Well, thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. I guess I think of taxation in a couple of ways. One way to think about it is a tax is a penalty you want to impose to discourage behavior. So we put taxes on sin, for example, because we want people to, the theory is if people have to pay more for cigarettes with an extra tax, they'll buy less cigarettes. And so when it comes to income, the last thing I wanted to do is discourage people from earning income. And if someone's being more productive, I want to make sure that there's an incentive for there to be, more productivity, more prosperity, more economic abundance, more economic activity, more commercial activity, more trades, more sales, more buying. So an income tax is a disincentive to earning. That's one way to look at it. Another way I think is a really big thing that we've been keeping in mind, I think we talked about this last month at the forum, was some of the biggest states that we're competing with for talent are states with no income tax. That'd be Texas, Florida, South Dakota. So when young families are looking for places to settle, one thing they consider is the tax rate. And so I think just straight up is we want to make sure we have a competitive tax environment, that if people are looking across all 50 states and they look at Iowa's low cost of living and other things, hopefully we can have a very competitive tax bracket in addition to attract people. So that'd be one way that I could answer your question, but I think there's a lot of reasons on why this tax proposal is important and why we're getting it done. And I think it's one of the most exciting things we're doing this year.
Yeah, I would agree with all of Jeff's points, and I would just add to that, again, the reason why we have the ability to pass this tax cut for everyday Iowans is because of our $1 billion surplus. And we have a $1 billion surplus because of the management principles that we've put in place the last 10 years since House Republicans have been in control and since we've took back the governorship, because 10 years ago or 12 years ago, more so when Governor Culver and the Democrats had control of the legislature, we had massive deficits because they'd overspent. We'd had across the board budget cuts because they'd overspent. And so we came in and we'd managed our budget well. But through that, we realized that we had over-collected taxes from Iowans, from you. And so instead of, again, going on a spending spree with your tax dollars, we believe that those tax dollars should be returned to you as Iowans that paid into the system. And so we're able to do this, and we're able to do this in a responsible manner because of the way that we've balanced our budget the last 10 years, just like you guys balance your budget at home, right, or at your business. And so essentially, that's how I look at it. Again, I've stated this before, but income taxes were unconstitutional in this country for nearly 150 years until we passed a constitutional amendment. And I think that that was one of the worst things that we did, because again, I don't think we should penalize people for wanting to make more money, to wanting to get a promotion, to wanting to go out and start a business and be more successful. And so I think it's it's detrimental to our state if we don't have lower taxes to compete with our neighboring states. I mean, Illinois, as of right now, has lower tax rates than us. That's completely crazy. And so, if you're on the border, either on the east or west side of our state, trying to figure out where to go, well, at this point, it still looks better as a taxation standpoint, to go over to Moline than stay in Davenport, or go over to South Dakota than stay in Sioux City. So that's where we're at with this, and this has been one of my biggest priorities this year, and I'm glad that we're passing it and giving your money back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing you mentioned earlier, and I appreciate your comments on that, on the fuel bill. Most of these big bills are complex, and there's so many different avenues in them, and there may be one little part of it that a person doesn't like. I mean, I'll tell you, most all these big bills, there's more than one little component in it that I don't like, but you got to take sometimes the bad with, or the not as good with the good to get something really good passed. So often these things are very, very complex. But as far as a flat tax, the surplus that we're sitting on, that's pretty amazing, the amount of the surplus, and it's going to allow us to implement some drastic changes like this flat tax. And as the labor chairman, attracting people is the biggest issue to this state, and one of the biggest problems we have is our tax structure on both sides. On businesses, on our tax structure for businesses, I think we're ranked 48th for corporations, 48th worst, and for personal income tax, we're very uncompetitive. And it's not just the rate. What a lot of people don't realize, that our highest tax rate at 6.5% kicks in at $75,000. So I believe starting pay as a teacher in Fairfield is right around $50,000. So you have a household of 2 starting teachers in Fairfield, Iowa. They're already in the maximum tax income bracket. Getting that. So, and I don't think most of us would consider $75,000 up for a household of 2 is being high wage. So this is bringing all these brackets down to a level that, we've gone through extensive, I'm on Ways and Means, and we've gone through extensive formulas and projections that take this thing out to 2029, and every year it's just better and better and better and better, and allows us to lower this thing down more and more and more till we get to 0%. So,
Okay.
Thank you for your question.
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, and regarding Representative Shipley's comment that it's a disincentive to work, even paying the tax, people will still make more money. You understand? You make more money this year, even with the tax taken off, you're still going to be ahead, right? So it's not necessarily a complete disincentive to work. The $1 billion surplus, we have to be honest about this. A lot of that money is federal money for pandemic relief. And I understand you want to kind of give that back to people. There are better ways to do that, because once you spend that $1 billion down by reducing taxes, the lower tax rates are still going to be there, but the revenue won't be. And that means that there are services that will have to be reduced. Already Iowa is seeing reduction in services. This is an anecdotal evidence, but it's I think, illustrative. It just came out that the DNR wants to close these park ranger houses, right? They want to move the park rangers out. We have $1 billion, but it requires $2 million to repair those houses. And we're not going to spend 0.2% of our surplus to repair those houses so that the park rangers either can live there, or if you want to move park rangers out, that's fine, but are you going to let the houses rot? Or are you going to perhaps repair them and rent them out? Well, if you repair them and rent them out, you still are spending the money. But regardless, the point is, you talk a lot about your great fiscal management, and some of it's pretty good, I have to say, but great fiscal management essentially sounds to me like starving many parts of the state budget of resources. Our seniors are in nursing homes that have inadequate inspections. Our schools, despite what you say, you give them a 2.5% raise, that's great, but you complain yourself about inflation, and inflation is going up at 5-7%, so it represents a real cut. $187 million, I think you said you're giving to the schools. That's for 500,000 students at 180 days in school. Rough back of the envelope calculation, that's about $2 a day per student. And in today's environment, that's not enough money to maintain the school district. And of course, their expenses go on 365 days a year, not 180 days a year. So there's a fixed cost that they have to overcome. With that added $2 a day per student, that is not enough money. And, great fiscal management sounds good when you're actually starving programs of resources.
Tom, did you have a follow-up question for the legislators?
I just want them to understand that
Yeah.
And then the other side of the coin is, yes, you can spend less, but then you reduce the quality of life in this state. Our waters are polluted. Our schools are not as good as
Tom,
they used
did you
to
have a
be.
follow-up question?
That's it, thank you.
Okay. Legislators, do you want to have
Yeah,
quick
I'll
responses
just add
to that?
a couple more thoughts. And again, I appreciate all the commentary. I think, there are a lot of important things that you brought out there. I don't think, we can really review the budget line by line and try to connect everything. I think you're kind of trying to connect some dots that might not be connected. But one way I think you're kind of thinking about it, maybe think about it perhaps this way, is if you have a tax rate, and we see this, the best example is going to be between Sioux City and Sioux Falls, South Dakota and Iowa. And if we have a higher tax rate in Iowa, it's not just, someone's, paying a little more taxes or what I said, there's going to be a disincentive, is that they're choosing to build in South Dakota. They're choosing to live in South Dakota, build their business in South Dakota. We have constituents here, they want to go down to Florida and live down in Florida 6.5 or 6 months and 1 day of the year and pay taxes there. So we're losing out entirely. So there's, obviously we have a state of, over 3 million people. Everyone's going to make their own complex economic calculation for themselves. But when we look at these tax policies, sometimes it can be on or off, that certain projects, certain families, they just don't come at all, and they'll take everything elsewhere. When we come to, you started with the DNR issue, so that was announced, I think it was in November, and Director Lyon, I had a post on this, I don't know if it made it in the paper or not, but one of the primary reason why Director Lyon made that decision with the DNR was that she felt the on-site lodging was no longer necessary, that they had done enough with remote camera equipment, that sort of thing, that they could remotely monitor and upkeep the sites remotely, and that the majority of state parks now don't have an on-site ranger. So just kind of, when the DNR makes that kind of decision, and reform, I know not everyone's happy, it is a different way of doing things, but I think we as citizens need to kind of ask each other and give the benefit of the doubt, hey, maybe there is a reason. Maybe the old way of doing something isn't that efficient. And I think it is a really, really great question that, okay, we have these assets, these houses, they're not really up to code, it's going to take maintenance to get them back up operational. Are we going to let them rot? Are we going to invest in them? And I think that's why the state of Iowa really needs to have a very slim, nimble operation and keep our assets low. We talk about this on the IT side with the ICN network. That was a total disaster. But Again, the state of Iowa puts a lot of resources, investments on local government. We have the same conversation. Local government's not taking care of their properties, not keeping up with maintenance at the courthouse, then putting a big bill on taxpayers because politicians aren't doing their jobs. So I appreciate all the commentary. Certainly there's room for improvement, but overall the quality of life in Iowa is excellent. There's no place in America I'd rather be, and I think a competitive tax structure is going to enable to continue to promote that and continue that direction of growth. So that's kind of how I look at it, but again, do appreciate the commentary and the discussion.
Thank you. Any other words from?
Yeah. Well, I just want to add in about the surplus. The surplus that we're talking about was saved because of the state budget. It wasn't because the federal funds that were given down to us, from the executive branch was by and large had strings attached to it and was mainly for pandemic specific purposes. And so we've had a massive surplus that we have built up, and we've been talking about doing a tax cut, a very large tax cut like this for several years, even before the pandemic, because of the massive surpluses that we have and because the reserve funds being filled. So it wasn't just because we got millions of dollars from the federal government from the COVID packages. It's because we have legitimately saved up and had the surplus for a long time. Regarding the schools issue and with inflation, that's why we had the one-time per pupil funding we're able to do this year, to address some of those inflation concerns, for this year. And the thing is that, I've had comments from people about the whole inflation deal and then 2.5%. And it's been from employers, some of them who serve on school boards. And then I wonder to myself, I'm like, well, have you given your employees this last year a 7% increase in wages? Because that's how we run things at the state government. And we don't do anything differently, and we can't just print money like the federal government can. So we still have to manage our money well, just like everyone else has, just like you have to do with your budget at home here. And then regarding the park ranger thing, to add on that too as well, my folks, they live, they border State Geode Park. They know their park ranger there, and they asked me about this, and I asked Director Lyons about this, and my solution is that I think we should, folks are near retirement, we should let them, stay in that home, and then, we can slowly start having folks move out of there. But the reason why they want the park rangers to start moving out is because, number one, because of the deferred maintenance, but also, only 22 out of 66 park rangers get to have a house, So they get paid the same, but some people get, a free house and some people don't, depending on, where you're located at and where you're placed at. And so, a lot of it comes down to a fairness issue, as well.
You had so many follow-up comments that I guess I had quite a few I wanted to reply to, but now I forgot what most of those were, to be honest. But, in regards to the inflation with the SSA, in the last several years, we haven't had a big inflation issue, right? It's almost been stagnant, but yet our funding on SSA improved or increased every year. To talk about the reason why we're wrong for what we did on our SSA this year because of the issue of inflation, well, if you want to play that card, I guess you got to play it back to the last 5 years as well. It's not based on inflation. There's many factors that come into that. When we talk about funding with schools, well, we haven't talked about the $1,000 that we're going to give every teacher as a thank you that was in the governor's conditionals of the state address. That's a chunk. The money that teachers are going to save, when we lower their income tax. If I mentioned again, the family of two teachers, $150,000 apiece, you're going to be going from roughly $6,500 a year in taxes down to, $3,600. It's about $3,000 savings. So there's other things that come into play than just one component. That's I guess what I'm getting at. There's many things. The state of Iowa got over $775 million from federal government in the last year or so on COVID money for schools, just for schools. There's a lot of things that factor into this. So, and I'm sure that the DNR, the schools, if you don't like this, I think the average savings on our tax bill will be about $1,600 a person. If you don't want it, I'm sure the DNR, the schools, be happy for you to write a check and give it directly to them. If you don't want that tax return, you're more than welcome to try on and donate it back to another group you think is underfunded. So, but the point is that money there, it's not our money, it's your money. You know, you've paid in too much. We've collected too much. It's your money, so we're just giving it back. And to just go spend more and more programs because we're sitting on more just causes a bigger problem when maybe 2 years from now the funding decreases a bit and we don't have the money then to keep up at that level, and then you are talking about budget cuts. So we're just giving your money back, and then once you get it back, if you want to turn around and donate it to a school or DNR or whatever, you're more than welcome to do that.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, Tom, for your question. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Looks like the mic is open right now.
We can ask Senator Dickey about biofuels again if you guys want.
All right, well, seeing none, if you guys are kind of, thinking, mulling over, oh, looks like we got one maybe? Excellent.
My name is Mark Porter. I'm on the school board here at Fairfield. One of the big controversial topics that's going through the state right now is school choice that the governor's pushing. I think it passed in a subcommittee yesterday. Just kind of want to get you guys' thoughts on that policy. As a parent, I'm strongly supportive of it. As a school board member, I question the sustainability of it long-term and what it'll do to schools long-term with the massive infrastructures that are placed in them. So I'd like to hear what you guys' opinions are on that and let the crowd know what your thoughts are. Thanks.
Great, Mark. Thanks for being here, and do appreciate all the work you do for the school board. So school choice, the idea is making sure that everyone has the same access to education. And I think the problem that, one way to look at it is one of the problems the governor's trying to solve with her proposal is when you look at educational outcomes, typically the kids with more money have better outcomes and they have more opportunities. So what the governor proposal would do is for lower to middle income students, it would allow them to get their state cost per pupil portion. And not to get too far off track, but one of the biggest frustrations when discussing the proposal is the state cost per pupil portion is but a fraction of the larger school finance picture. In my opinion, now your district's in an interesting situation, but I still think it'd be a benefit for you. And one key improvement that the government's plan provides, to answer your question directly, is right now, if a student open enrolls out of the district or unenrolls, you lose 100% of that state cost per pupil. Under this program, for every kid who takes advantage of the program or unenrolls, you get a portion back. So for every child who actually takes advantage of this program, there's a portion, it retains the remaining portion of that state cost per pupil, roughly about $1,458, would be retained by the local district. So right now you get $0 for every kid that unenrolls. Under this, you would get a portion of that state cost per pupil back, and that would elevate the total dollars per pupil for the rest of the district. In other districts like Davis County, where they run their school board program, they run their homeschool program from the school district, I don't think they'd be affected at all because they're doing a great job. Parents are satisfied. They find all the options they want within the school district already. So from my talk with parents down there, say, hey, are you happy with your child's education? Well, yes, I'm happy. Okay, are you going to do anything different if this law passes? No, I think we're going to stay put because we're happy. Okay, your district's going to be unaffected. So really the main beneficiaries of this program are going to be the lower to middle income students in Des Moines, in Cedar Rapids, in Ames, and in Iowa City, who frankly are not getting the education that's best for them or the education that their parents want, and it will provide a level playing field, giving them basically the same financial resources that a rich family would have, that a poor kid in Cedar Rapids will have every same educational opportunity. They won't be limited by their zip code. They won't be limited by their parents' earning power. And again, that piece is built in to make sure you guys get as much financial backfill as possible. So overall, I think it'd be a stabilizing thing. I don't know all the enrollment numbers from your district. My memory serves me, you've lost some students over the last couple of years. Under this program, you would be more financially solvent with those unenrollment figures. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about this proposal. I just want to say thank you to the governor for leading on the discussion. And because there is a lot more to talk about, I do anticipate we'll be having more public events dedicated exclusively to this. But I do appreciate, again, your service and for tracking the issue and for starting the conversation.
Thanks, Roger. So So by and large, the reality is that the vast majority of students will go to a public school in Iowa. The chances that you all went to public school, as a majority of you did, is probably true as well. I went to a public school. I went to Waco Community High School in Wayland. And so, I've always been a large advocate of our public schools. Again, the vast majority of them do an incredible job teaching our students. And again, I think it'll be that way for a long, long time. However, there is certain school districts that have not necessarily done their job right. A lot of those, aren't necessarily, in our communities. A lot of those are in Des Moines and Ames and Johnson County. And I think this piece of legislation keeps them accountable, because I do agree with Jeff's point that we shouldn't, just because a family can't afford to go to public school or to private school and get a different education if they don't agree with what their public school is teaching them, that they shouldn't be, constrained by their finances. And so I think that's what this piece of legislation the governor has recently proposed does address. She does have a component in that bill as well that gives additional money to our rural public schools if you have an enrollment less than 500 people, which would be places like where I went to school, at Waco or Winfield, or I assume maybe Van Buren as well. And so I do like your proposal this year a lot more than I have in years past. But the other way, I've been thinking about this as well, because I get told that this is a slippery slope that we're going down. If we start out with $5 million to give to these educational savings accounts, then it's going to grow to $50 million and $100 million and $200 million. We've had the Iowa tuition grant in this state for the past 2 decades, and it's essentially been capped at $50 million for that whole entire time. And so the Iowa tuition grant, for folks that aren't familiar with it, is a grant where we give to students in the state of Iowa to go to private universities. To private four-year universities like Central, Drake, Loras. And so, again, I look at this, and essentially in, a similar fashion, but at the same time, if students aren't leaving, your public school to go somewhere else or be homeschooled, you're not going to lose money. And I think for the vast majority of our public schools here, in our area, I don't think they're going to lose a lot of money, because I think we do a really good job, and I think that majority of folks won't choose to homeschool or send their kids to a private school, and there's also a lack of private schools to send their kids to. So again, I like to preface that just because I'm a supporter of the governor's ESA bill this year doesn't mean I'm anti-public school. I absolutely advocate for higher SSA percentages, and I believe that I believe that our public schools should continue to get an increase in funding, because, again, the vast majority of children, I assume my children someday will go to a public school, and obviously I want them to be, at the highest caliber as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Like many pieces of legislation that are proposed that are, very lightning on both sides, this is one that certainly has not lacked any public input on it. And it doesn't make it easy when a lot of the stuff being passed around about the bill aren't correct. One thing I ask anybody is, and before I was elected, I was guilty of it as well. I read a few talking points, read an article, and assume that's all correct and form opinion on that without going out and actually reading the bill. And all these bills are available online, on the state website, to read what it actually says. I got an email from an elected official in Ottumwa here in the last week or so that said that this bill would divert $54,000 per student. $54,000. It's not $54,000, but this is from an elected official in Ottumwa. I don't know where he got his talking points from, but that's some of the stuff, and if that gets spread around to many other people, they think $54,000 per student and 10,000 students, that's $540 million. That's the stuff that you deal with when you're having to address some of these issues, is just the misinformation that's out there. But the governor's bill is about transparency in education and giving more students access to options that they don't have available to them. Where we're at in this area, I don't see that as going to be a huge risk. You know, as Joe and Jeff mentioned, it's probably more in your urban areas, Des Moines, Ankeny, Iowa cities, Davenport areas that are really, parents are really struggling with seeing their students not get the education that they want. And on top of just the education issue, there's a lot of, in the last several years, there's been a lot of issues that our schools are in the middle of that were never into play before. You know, critical race theory, defying mask mandates, you know, defying state law and mask mandates, critical race theory. I've heard of schools having parties for students once they get vaccinated. You know, get vaccinated, they pull them in the front of the classroom and they have a party for them. The pornographic books that are in schools now. I mean, I'm sorry, this is pathetic, this language, and people will take a side on this. I can't tell you how many, I've received hundreds of emails on this issue from people bashing me on my position that these books should not be allowed in our schools. And every single time I reply to them and say, have you read the books? Have you looked at these books? Or are you just responding with some, you know, some talking points that you got because you're on the opposite side politically on the aisle than I am as a Republican? Have you looked at the subject? Please look at the books and then come back to me with an opinion. And only one out of a couple hundred emails has someone ever responded to me. You know, once they see the material, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. You know, it's transgender bathrooms. I mean, we can just go one after another, after another, after another, that over years, parents are finally saying, I've had enough. You know, I've spoken out to my school districts and they're not responding to some of this stuff. And they want a different choice. And I'm firmly believing that's what's driving the school choice as much as anything. You know, some school boards just aren't listening. And you know what? Some school boards might be listening, but it also, the school board cycle to get people unelected and reelected can take years. You know, that's not fair to the parents either. And I think that's what's driving this as much as anything. Now, this bill really doesn't address that because it's low income. I mean, there's things in place to really allow that student that's a low income to have opportunities that they're not able to have right now. But I will say this to some of these school boards, listen up. Open your ears up, and you better start listening to the people that are talking to you, because people are mad. You know, the people that pay the taxes that run these schools are mad about some of the choices that you're making because their voices aren't being heard. It's going to get very hard to vote against school choice because of that issue. You know, for every one letter that I may receive on wanting more school funding, I have 100 letters I receive about wanting less property taxes and less income taxes. For every one letter I receive something about helping the school, I receive 200 letters about CRT, pornographic books, masks, I mean, those issues, okay? Schools are not listening to the people in their district as to what their real concerns are. And what school choice really does, and again, I'm not sitting here promoting it and pushing for it by any means, but what school choice is going to do is it's going to kind of give other options, and if the school isn't doing what the people in their district wants, they're going to have another option, okay? And the other part that really upsets me on this whole issue is I've spoken to the majority of administration and of the schools in this district, right? And they run good schools, okay? They run good schools. And a lot of stuff is in this is probably aimed towards your Des Moines, your Davenport, your Iowa cities, some schools that aren't doing the things that they're wanting to do. And they're completely bucking the system or defying what state law says on some of these issues. But the school districts that aren't necessarily doing that, or not doing it nearly to that level, aren't speaking out against them, you know? I've told many school districts in this area, you need to speak up against the Des Moines School District and the stuff that they're doing, okay? Because they're making y'all look bad. You know, take a stand against these other school districts as the stuff that they're doing is making you look bad. Because if you don't, then don't complain when things start to change and it affects you guys, okay? I've told that to my local school district at Pekin. I've said that to the school board members in Fairfield and Van Buren and Cardinal. You got to start having a voice if you're a school board or your administration and you don't like the stuff that's happening in other districts that's going to tarnish you. Okay, you've got an association. Speak up in your association. But until they're willing to do that, it's pretty hard to be sympathetic when they come and say, oh, why are you doing this, when they haven't spoken out on their own.
Thank you so much for your responses, and thank you, Mark, for your question.
Thanks, guys.
Tracy Deal, Fairfield and Jefferson County Farm Bureau. Funding for increased DNR conservation land acquisition. I just kind of want your thoughts on that bill. As far as a farmer's standpoint and a taxpayer standpoint, the more land that the DNR buys, it puts more competition to the farmers for land prices and such. And then on the flip side, the property taxes. So how much more DNR land do we want to purchase to get that out of tax-paying dollars, to put the property tax burden more on the rest of us who are still paying our property taxes to fund all these things that the property taxes are funding. So I know that's in there. I just want your opinions on that land acquisition and what your feelings are on that.
I know this came up a couple of years ago when I was on the Natural Resources Committee. I think just a couple of quick thoughts is going back to the state parks discussion. I think one of the things that came up was, once a state or a conservation group is acquiring this land, are they doing the maintenance and taking care of it? Some people had some skepticism on, is the state, the DNR, do they have the competency and the resources to actually do this? So no, I'm generally, discouraging. I don't think the state needs to go about acquiring any more assets. I don't think they need to be competing against farmers for good land. So I don't know exactly what the legislative proposal is, but I'm happy to follow your direction and appreciate you letting us know.
Yeah, I was I echo the similar thoughts. I'm not on the Natural Resource Committee. I haven't looked at this bill specifically, but I would have a similar mindset that we shouldn't be competing with farmers or private citizens in general with the state, buying land that's that's farmable, I guess. I mean, obviously the DNR's response a lot of times to this is that they're buying land that isn't good land anyways for you to plant crops on, and that's what their answer normally is. And so I guess I haven't dived into the issue far enough to, I guess, have a solid opinion, but would love to talk to you afterwards on kind of thoughts that you all have on, how to reasonably go about that issue.
This is part of the Senate tax bill, and it's one of those things, there's so many different components in it, and it gets very, very weedy. From what I understand, the part that's being triggered, the 3/8 of 1 cent, is being triggered by the change in the sales tax. The sales tax is being solidified at a statewide 7% with the 1 cent that I think there's only all but 13 communities, there's all but 13 taxing entities in the state of Iowa that's collecting the 1 cent option sales tax, like 1,000 taxing entities, school boards, counties, cities, etc. So pretty much everybody's doing it. The state collects it and then from the resellers or whoever it is, and then sends it out to communities. Part of the problem with the formula is now we've seen let's say a lot of our online sales, okay? We have a tremendous amount of online sales. A lot of the resellers from out of state aren't paying that 1 cent, okay? The state collects what they collect and sends it to the city, but it's the city's or the ending entity's responsibility to go back and collect that 1 cent. Well, solidifying that 7% or 7 cent sales tax across the board allows the state then to go out and collect that. It's going to generate a lot of lost sales tax that's not being collected currently. That, though, triggers this 3/8 cent DNR issue, buying ground. All this ties into the tax bill. So you find the one piece, and I hate this 3/8 cents. I agree. I mean, I do not think the DNR needs to be buying good ground or bad ground in competition of regular items that want to buy the ground, okay? And there's cases where they're paying above appraised value, and that's what it's supposed to be at, and that's just wrong. But that's what's happening. but it gets so complex as the different things that it's not as simple as just taking that one little component out of it. I introduced a bill this year, Senate File 2215, which kind of goes at it in a little different area or a little different angle. The idea, part of the idea of this is of the DNR to buy this ground is one of the main components is for hunting. You know, probably more hunting opportunities, right? And so my bill says that if you're a private landowner and you got 40 acres or more and you want to allow that to be used for public hunting, that there's I believe it's a $7 or $8 per acre tax credit you can receive. Okay, so now you're providing public hunting on your ground. You're still owning the ground. You're getting a tax credit, but then that money for that $7 per acre or $8, I forget what it is exactly. That money's coming out of the DNR fund that they're using to purchase ground. Okay, it's coming at a little different angle, and it's providing. I mean, the state can provide a whole lot more ground for hunting at $8 an acre than they can at $4,000 an acre. So it's looking at it in a little different angle, but I share your frustration with that, and I've received a lot of emails on that very issue.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for your question. Sir, looks like you're next up.
Thank you. I'm not very good at public speaking or asking questions, but my name is James Elliott, and I live in Round Prairie Township here in Fairfield, Iowa. I want to thank you guys for your courage and your conviction for what you're doing and representing us up in Des Moines, because I know you're under attack daily from all different angles. School choice, being as the topic was brought up today, it's time that out-of-control bureaucratic administration needs to learn that they're working for the school board, not vice versa. On top of that, we elect the school board to represent us, the parents, the grandparents, the guardians of the students in the public school system. I'm glad to see school choice, although I think this bill, I don't totally understand everything, but it's only limited to maybe 10,000 students a year. I'm not sure about that, but I'd open it up to more. Because unless these public school systems are brought under control, and I know last year the legislative session, I don't know what bill number it is, but brought up critical race theory. Well, I'm sorry, but it's not being enforced. And I know from having a grandson in the Fairfield public school system, the books they don't have textbooks anymore. They don't bring homework home to do from school anymore. They can't bring their computers home with them. And unless a parent or a grandparent or a guardian is asking them what's being taught in the public school system, they don't know what's going on. Before I sign my grandson's journal that he has to turn in every Thursday, I ask him what's being taught in the public school and in his classes. They read various books online in class, such as Blended, Stamped, which Stamped is about racism, anti-racism, and you. And now they got a new video going on in 8th grade social studies in the Fairfield public school system of a DVD they're watching or whatever from Henry Louis Gates Jr. about the Reconstruction of America. So like I said, it's time the school board needs to realize they do not work for the superintendent, which is usually under the control of out-of-control bureaucracy coming out of Washington, D.C., and realize that they're working for the parents, the grandparents, and the guardians of this community and our children and grandchildren that are attending those schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Did you have a specific question, or would you like our legislators to respond to your comments?
I'm not looking for any response.
Okay.
I just know school choice was brought up. CRT's been brought up, and I'm just expressing my view. And I
Okay.
thank you guys for what you're doing and the courage and conviction you have to stand up to stuff that's going on in this country right now.
Thank you. Did you gentlemen want to respond to anything that James had said, just really quick?
Well, unless we want to let Karen go.
Go ahead.
So, wow, this is tall. So I'm Karen Crossland from Fairfield, and I do too. I know this isn't a topic we're covering this forum, but I want to thank you guys for being pro-life. To me, the life issue is really the most important issue we have, because if you don't have life, nothing else matters. So thank you for all you're doing to support our preborn brothers and sisters. Keep up the fight. I think we're making progress. I'm not sure all the bills that are coming forward, but I just thank God every day for our pro-life governor. I thank God for our pro-life legislators. We need to get this turned around. Abortion is just killing our children, and we don't want to do that. You know, our children are our most precious resource. So thank you, guys. God bless.
Thank you for your comment, Karen. Does anybody else have any questions for our legislators today?
Hi, my name is Christy Welsh, and I am in school board here in Fairfield. And I wanted to make one correction. Senator Dickey said that a starting pay for our teachers here is $50,000. It's not. It's $39,314, which is not close to 50. I also would like to ask about the school choice, and our teachers or our districts are required, excuse me, are required to follow so many rules and regulations for education. Our private schools, where the public money is going to go for the school choice, are they also going to be required to follow those same rules and regulations?
Well, thank you, I guess, for correcting me if that's correct. I pulled, the number I came up with was from the Iowa Public School Teacher Information for 2020 to 2021, and it shows, it states that the average teacher regular salary for Fairfield is $50,124. So,
Average is not a starting salary.
okay, I'm sorry. If
That's where the
if I said
correction is.
starting, then I misspoke. Average teacher pay for
Okay,
Fairfield is $50,000.
and that's probably correct.
But even starting, okay, $39,000 starting, a household of two teachers at $39,000 are in our highest tax bracket. You know, the point still is that $39,000, that's $78,000, you're in the highest tax bracket.
I understand.
That's what I was trying to address.
I'm just wanted to make that correction.
Okay, thank you.
I'll offer a couple thoughts. Thank you, Christy, for being here and for your question. I guess the first part on the school choice piece, so the program would be governed under what they call 299A, accredited non-public education. So it would basically, that's the same thing that the Maharishi School is licensed under or whatever. I don't know the exact rules, but just going after what Mr. Elliott just shared, a lot of people think that a lot of the rules and bureaucracy are contributing to the problem. And so I think that's one of the purposes, is to give people an escape valve and get them into a better environment that's probably not so weighed down and encumbered by that bureaucracy. Just a piece on the teacher wage thing, and this is something I first learned at a school choice conference. So over the last 10 years, the state allotment, that's that per pupil amount we talked about, that's actually increased 27% since fiscal year 2012. So the state allotment's gone up 27%, but when you track teachers' wages across that same time, they've remained very stagnant or gone down. So that is, again, why all these systems are so complicated. We've tried to put billions of new dollars into the education system. We want that in the classroom. Nobody wants a situation where a teacher has to spend out of their own pocket to furnish their classroom. But somehow the allocation's not getting there. Like I said, 27% increase in the state allotment, but teachers' wages have remained stagnant over that same time. And to me, that just shows we have some very, very serious issues to examine in the bureaucracy, in the administration, in the rules, everything that's contributing to the system. We really need to take a deep look, because if we want these monies to go to their highest and best purpose, we need to make sure we're doing the work that it gets there. And just a couple other figures to end on. So we've heard a lot about the 2.5% SSA figure, but again, when I look at the adopted Fairfield budget summary, this comes from the Department of Management,
The total revenues is actually up 5.5% from budget 2022 to 2021. And then, of course, we had those federal ESSER dollars on top of that. So there's a lot that goes into these funding mechanisms, and I think a lot of people are rightfully concerned that we're not getting necessarily the outcomes that we want, both in the professional level and the outcomes for our children. And that's why we really, really need to have a deep conversation, an honest conversation. And so I'm very thankful for everyone who's coming to the table to talk about these school choice proposals, because I think it's going to do a lot of good for a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And obviously, I've spoke my half on what I think about school choice and the governor's current proposed bill. But the other thing I will say, I have heard several colleagues of mine, have made the comment, obviously, private schools don't have to take everybody and anybody. Obviously, our public schools do. You guys don't have the ability to reject students that may be handicapped, may have behavioral problems. So I do anticipate that being a discussion in our caucus about the current ESA bill and about attaching some current certain strings to the ESA. If you're going to take these public dollars, that might be a topic of discussion. I'm not saying that necessarily agree with that or disagree with that as of right now. I'm just saying that has been brought up, to your point about rules and regulations that private schools maybe don't have to necessarily follow.
But just to be clear, public schools right now can expel students, so it's not totally unique to the private school arena, but certainly for the IEP kids, and that's the thing, is we want every child to make sure they have the best opportunity, and certainly for the IEP, behavioral disorder students, a lot of times that's going to be in a non-public setting, and so we just want to make sure that these dollars are actually supporting the student. And to Joe's point earlier on the tuition grant or the Pell Grant at the federal level, that's a great example, because in the post-secondary, it's much more obvious that you want those funds to support the student directly, that the student's in charge of their learning, and so we're really just wanting to apply that model more broadly to K through 12 as well.
Senator Dickey, any thoughts?
I think it responded earlier, so.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, and we have just a couple minutes left, probably time for one more question, if there's anybody that has a question on their mind.
Ryan Metz with Farm Bureau. I live north of Fairfield. On this coon control and the deer population problems that are taking over 35% of my crops. My boys were hunting coon a year ago, and are about 5 boys, and they got tickets for shooting the coons, but they go out and take out 15 to 20 rows by a creek, and they're a total loss. I can't even pick the corn up with the combine. They told us, well, you got to get a trapper. The trappers won't even trap coon anymore because they won't even take them when they do skin them. So I think it's great that we're trying to get this moved, but the DNR, we've had them out to do our deer population control, and they still won't give us tags to take them because they said it's not taking enough of our crops.
Thank you, sir. Did you have a question for them, or just general comments based on your comment?
Just general comments. What
All
you
right.
guys think we need to be fighting for to the DNR?
Thank you. Do you guys have any comments?
Well, I apologize the state of Iowa inconvenienced you in that way and affected your kids. Hopefully we can get that done and get those permits issued or tags. Sorry if that's not more helpful.
Okay.
And I think the bill you're referring to is a House bill. I haven't read it, being on the Senate side, but being a lifelong hunter, I understand, I think, the concept where you're getting at, and your words are not unique by any means. Many farmers for many years. I can recall, years ago watching, turkey hunting, and, turkey just going down your corn row and just fresh corn stalk them up and just plucking them out, and just one after another. So it's a very frustrating and upsetting issue, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think they should be able to just give you the tag. If you call in and say, I got a predator problem, I don't see why the DNR would get in your way on that. Although I think we are learning to appreciate possums a lot more because they keep the tick population under control.
That is true. All right, so we have actually reached 9 o'clock already, and so I think we will kind of adjourn this session of our legislative forum, but I want to once again thank our sponsors, the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center, Freeman Cavanides Law Firm, Jefferson County Farm Bureau, and the Morrissey Law Office. I would also like to thank our legislators for attending today and making themselves available. Thank you so much. And then our next legislative forum will be here at the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center on Saturday, March 19th, again at 7:30 a.m. We hope to see you there. Have a good day.